Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I'm Bob Ellison. I chair the Rev 250 Advisory Group. We are a consortium of 70 organizations in Massachusetts planning ways to commemorate the 250th anniversary of American independence. And our guests today are David Head from the University of Central Florida. He's also a faculty fellow at Kentucky Wesleyan, author of a book on privateers, as well as a book about Washington and Newburgh, and Timothy Hemmis, who is an associate professor at Texas A&M in Central Texas. And they've co-edited a new book, A Republic of Scoundrels, the schemers, intriguers, and adventurers who created a new American nation. And it's a collection of characters that you'll never think about the formation of the United States the same way again once you've encountered this crew of characters that they've put together. So Timothy and David, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm delighted to talk with everyone today.
Now, so we have great characters in the book, but actually it's kind of ironic that the idea came up when one of you was doing research in the Benjamin Franklin papers.
Yeah. Yep. I was in Philadelphia doing research, working on this other project that I have going on. And I kept running across these names. And then, lo and behold, the pandemic hit and we were all shut down. Mm-hmm. And it was through this idea out on Twitter, because I've had this idea, like all these names, like it would be kind of a cool project to work on as Scoundrels of the Early Republic or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I threw the idea out there on Twitter, and David responded saying, hey, I think this would be a good idea. And a bunch of others, some who actually ended up being our contributors, also joined in and spawned the project.
Wow. So how did you choose the characters who were in the book?
Well, some of them were obvious choices, like Aaron Burr, for example, and Benedict Arnold.
Yes.
Right? Those are the guys where you think of Scoundrel right away.
Yeah. And they're the beginning and the end of the book. It
right.
begins with Arnold and ends with Burr.
Yeah. Right. Oh, you're right about that. You know what? I never noticed the significance of that. That's just the way we did it. Yeah. Oh, let's go back and say, of course we that's right. That way, the symbolism of that. But some other ones, came to mind. If you're a specialist in this area, people like James Wilkinson. Right, you see everywhere. That's one of the guys that Tim just sees everywhere in the research. Yeah. So some of them were just characters that the people know that Tim had been seeing a lot in the sources, especially. Mm-hmm. So we came up with some of those guys. William Augustus Bowles, who's active in the Southeast. That's somebody who comes up a lot on the borderlands. Yeah. So William Blount in Tennessee, right? The first senator to be impeached. Okay, and for some of his land dealing and all that in the western part of the country, and then others kind of chose us. We got to talking to people, right? So once we start, trying to put the project together, and you need to get to a certain number, right? You can't get 6 or something. You got to get like 10 to 12, 13, somewhere there. And so we start talking to people, and we got a couple recommendations. Why don't you talk to this person? He's working on something in that area. See if he's interested. We had Gene Smith, who you may know, at Texas at TCU. He recommended a couple of his students, James Plumer and Jackson Pearson, and said, "Yeah, these guys are working on something good. See if they're interested." So that's how he got onto Philip Nolan, who was a scoundrel operating out of Texas, a horse dealer, who I certainly had never heard of before. But he's fit exactly in the cast of characters we're looking for.
Right.
And then Jane wrote about the Kemper brothers in West Florida, who I've heard about, but never really delved deep into their story. So let's do them too. So it's a combination of those prime figures that we knew were scoundrels, right? Everybody would say, yeah, that guy is a scoundrel, as well as scholars who are working on more specialized fields knew of these kind of people who pop up all the time, and they had stories that were just as interesting.
Right. This particular period, I mean, there's a lot going on that makes this a lot of opportunities for people who bend that way to, make a quick buck and do it in an unscrupulous way. Do you have a favorite who emerged?
Ooh, favorite's a tough one.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, the American Revolution kind of opens up kind of Pandora's box and sets up this. And so I really think some of these guys are really, and I say guys because they're all men,
Mm-hmm.
and I keep leaning to James Wilkinson as kind of,
He is a fascinating character.
and like there could be even more on him, and I think a lot of there's more going on with him, like scholarship on him.
Yeah.
But I mean, the fact that he's a Spanish informant and all these different things, but he really truly is an opportunist.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And, Sam Watson writes the chapter on Wilkinson, so he ends up being kind of, I don't know, the one I gravitate to the most of Scoundrel, but Aaron Burr is right there alongside him.
Sure.
Neck and neck.
Yeah.
For me, the one I really kind of latched onto was William Blount in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I knew the name. I knew Blount County, and all that. Said the names all over Tennessee. A few times I've driven through there, and of course, the Senate, the first impeachment, that kind of trivia question. But when Chris Magra wrote about him over and over again, I'm like, whoa, what is this guy? This guy's just brazen, and how he is defrauding Revolutionary War veterans, cheating Native American tribes, bullying them off their land, using his position as a territorial governor, right? Not on the side, but using his position as governor to gain more and more and more land for himself. And he's just open, but not open. He is publicly keeping things clamped down so that no one from Washington gets too curious. But he writes openly to his associates, to his brother, saying, his brother must have written him saying, well, how are we going to get legal title to these lands? And he writes back something like, don't worry about it. We'll find people who can swear falsely.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, he has all these false affidavits that he's filling out, these false deeds. Yeah.
And just the brazenness of it all.
And then he hears that Robert Morris had sold land to someone in Amsterdam. He thinks, that's a great idea. So he sends agents off to...
Exactly. Those guys in Europe, they won't know anything about
it. That's right, yeah.
I can tell them I have 20 million acres. And
that's right.
They think America is so big. But just the brazenness and the vast scale of what he was doing is it's really incredible. So that's the one who, when I was reading that chapter, I was like, whoa, again and again. How could that's further than I thought anyone could go.
It really is. It makes us think too about the characters like Washington, who loom so large about everyone for his moral probity, that he's actually operating in a world filled with schemers, connivers, intriguers, in a way that I don't think we appreciate. Sometimes we have this idea that the founders were actually better than us, but it's only some of the ones we remember, I think, who are.
Right, that's a great point, because we do get the version of first of all, you have a very small cast of characters, right? We think of the founders as like 6 guys, right?
Yeah.
We forget all the secondary and tertiary characters, which is understandable because you can only remember so many names, and even if you're a specialist, you only remember so many people. So it's a much larger cast of characters. And as you said, we expect them to be always well behaved because they talk about virtue so often, and they look so solid in those pictures, right?
Yeah.
Well,
it's like the Puritans who always talked about sin because they knew people who were sinning. It wasn't that they were better; they understood human nature in a way that Madison certainly understood human nature because he knew a lot of these characters.
Right. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they don't talk about public virtue all the time because it's easy. Right.
That's right.
They talk about it all the time because it's hard. They know that there are many people who are falling short.
Yeah. William Augustus Bowles is a fascinating guy because he starts off as a Tory and then he sees which way things are going. And then he winds up with this, trying to create this colony of Muskogee in Florida. Can you talk a little bit about Bowles? I know you didn't write the chapters, but you, having edited it, you know more about these guys than I do.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, so you're right. William Augustus Bowles has this interesting arc where he's born in a Maryland family. He's a loyalist. He fights supports the British side during the Revolution. But he comes to benefit from the Americans winning and gaining independence. Once the United States is independent, then the rules are all different. And there's a room for an ambitious person like Bowles. This happens with a number of other guys as well, to kind of find out where the boundaries are, right? How much has changed? What exactly can I do now that I couldn't have done previously? So he ends up trying to carve out a a kind of new nation, Muskogee, made up of Native Americans, right? So they'll be distinct from the other empires around them, not part of the United States or Britain or Spain, their own country. Okay? And that sounds pretty good, right? So that's kind of an admirable thing to do, to try to find a way that Native Americans could survive and thrive when the rules are changing and when the Americans are pretty clearly going to want to move and run over them. But there's a key part of this for Bowles. It's not just creating a new nation. It's creating a new nation that he is going to lead. And I think that's really the key part. I kind of imagined that if Bowles had been in a different place in the country, he would have found a different project that also had him in charge. Either maybe breaking away one of the Western states so that he could be in charge of it. So I think the details were flexible. The goal was that he would be in charge of this. And Bowles really played the part very well. He went to travel around the world, actually. He went to Canada to try to gain British support from the Canadian and Canada, the officials there. He traveled over to London to drum up support. And since he's such at a far distance, he can present himself as pretty much anything he wants.
Right.
He can show up with the documents that appear to have him appointed as the leader of the Native American tribes and say, this is what I'm doing. I'm the leader, right? They all trust me. I'm in charge. So yes, it's a great example of improvising, acting the part, right? Fake it till you make it kind of thing. Yeah. If he acts like he's in charge, then he is in charge. Another interesting part about it, I said he traveled around the world. Part of it willingly, part of it not so willingly. He's arrested at one point, especially by the Spanish, I think, and then transported to the Philippines. He escapes there, makes his way back. He's in Africa for a while. Wow. That's not easy to do, to escape and travel all the way back to the Atlantic there. So he's in prison in Cuba, I think, for a while. So those are where his adventures take him. I think the key part is, again, he wants to use kind of the Native American status in order to make himself to be their leader. That's what he really wants, is to be the leader.
And what happened? Oh, no, go on, Tim.
Well, I was going to say that there's this idea of the frontier, right? Or the borderlands that allows this, because there's not a strong order or authority in those regions, allowed for these individuals like Bowles or even Aaron Burr to start claiming I'm my own leader and this is my territory. And go ahead, David. You can
a guy I just thought of Thomas Green, who was in Georgia, goes over the border into the Spanish territory, and the bottom line is it basically says Georgia is taking you over now. Deal with it. The Georgians are kind of like, what do you mean? We didn't go for that. And the Spanish are like, what do you mean? You can't just come over here and say this is your territory. But because he's aggressive and ambitious on the territory, on the frontier there, and the authority figures are so far distant, he kind of has the room where he could get away with it if things had fallen differently for him. He could have gotten away with just kind of, again, just making the assertion and daring anybody to stop him. Is a lot of what's going on along the borders, because the borderlands are both distant from authority figures, but it's also the primary place where you're going to have conflict between nations. So some guys are able to use that as leverage to get what they want in between.
Right. We're talking with Timothy Hemmis and David Head about their book, Republic of Scoundrels, the schemers, intriguers, and adventurers who created a new American nation. So it is two things to seem open this up. One is the American Revolution, with this idea of independence, not only for a nation, but for each individual, but then also, as David was saying, these borderlands, which have lots of opportunities, as well as opportunities both to get rich potentially, but also for fraud, as well as to create conflict with Spain or with the Creeks or with other nations. And so these are guys really seeing opportunities and taking them.
Yeah, one of the things that you have to think of, and David kind of referred to this earlier, is with the American Revolution, there's no set rules and regulations of morals and ethics. And so at some point you have to push the boundaries, push, to see where they are. And that's kind of helped shape, that's why we call it shaping the new republic. Right. Because you have to have those individuals that may be, doing not so good stuff or self-interest stuff at the very least, to see where the boundaries are.
Right.
That's really where this project really comes together, to show that that's what these men were doing, was pushing the boundaries, and then it was helping shape that new nation. Whether they're, whether they succeed at their schemes, it still shaped the nation.
Right. And then, of course, Tim, you wrote the chapter on Aaron Burr. He is pushing boundaries, but then, of course, the nation sets boundaries for him. And then the trial itself comes out not the way Jefferson would have hoped, but probably best. I mean, imagine every time someone runs afoul of an administration, he's tried for treason. What kind wouldn't really be the Republic as we know it. So that's, can you talk a little bit about Burr and what's driving him?
Well, I mean, we kind of know about Burr, recently, because of, the play Hamilton.
The music, yeah.
Yeah, the musical, just kind of everybody, but it doesn't talk about what happens afterwards, right?
Right, yeah.
And so Burr,
the duel might not have been the big thing for Burr.
And so he is, vice president. He shoots Hamilton. And he ends up going out west and he's angry at a lot of things. He feels like he's lost political capital and he wants to gain. And so he starts in these various schemes. And it's very unclear because he goes to different people and tells them different things. One, he's telling people he's going to, create a frontier army and march on, the capital. There's others where he's saying he's going to go and filibuster in Spanish territory. Go down to New Orleans and seize New Orleans. All these different things would end up ultimately, at the very least, starting a civil war. And so there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
And that's why I call him the American scoundrel. So he gets put on trial, and there's some, and I'm not a legal expert by any means, but I suspect there was some blunders, mistakes done by, probably more on the prosecution.
Yeah.
They brought the wrong charges up. But it was really the trial of the century, and it really shapes the early republic. And the funny thing is now, like when you get into, the textbooks and stuff, it's just a little clip.
Yeah. It was because the Chief Justice presides over the trial, and the Chief Justice who actually hates the president, who's bringing these charges. I'm sorry, David.
I say, Tim, tell him about the story about the Feast of Treason.
Oh yeah,
it's not just the Chief Justice presiding; there's more to it.
So, during the trial itself is really just a circus.
Yeah,
I mean, there's multiple dual challenges between, for example, James Wilkinson and Aaron Burr, all these different things.
Yeah.
Then Burr is out on bail, and he has literally the dream team of defense team.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Edmund Randolph is on his team. There's a guy, John Wickham, who's there, and he throws a party and invites John Marshall. Well, John Marshall, actually, I think his wife actually says something to him, basically saying, "Don't go." And he goes, "Well, it's not going to be too bad." And he goes, and Aaron Burr is at the party. And then all the partisan newspapers pick up on this.
Yeah.
Call it the Feast of Treason, which is a great name, by the way.
It is.
And so it gets kind of thrown out into the media, and it gets absolutely just, like I said, it is the trial of the century.
Yeah. Imagine this, because Burr is a very charismatic figure, and he had been elected vice president, being a senator from New York. I mean, he had this great career. He almost became president in 1800, and he's now on trial for treason. And he has, as you said, Edmund Randolph, former governor of Virginia, Luther Martin, who is known as the bulldog of federalism, is another of his lawyers, and way overmatched the federal prosecutors in this case. Which happened? Where does it happen?
It happens in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
So.
And then James Wilkinson, who's also a character in the book, is a witness for the prosecution. And some of the observers are astounded that this guy that they know to be so flagrantly corrupt is now testifying against Aaron Burr. You know, Wilkinson. Yeah.
I think it's Washington Irving that reports talking about, the guy that wrote Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
He comments, because he's actually a reporter covering the trial, reports that Wilkinson struts in like a cocked turkey.
Wow.
And just, that's the quote. And it's just,
Yeah.
like I said, the trial itself is a circus.
Yeah.
It would have been a must-see TV.
It would have been, It's too bad we didn't have court TV then to cover the Burr trial. It would be much more than a blip in the textbooks.
Correct.
Because it's a very important story too. Legally, constitutionally, it's an important story, as well as this idea that Burr is he scheming to break off the West, or is it he says Jefferson told me I have support to go take over Mexico? There is so much plausible deniability that Burr was also a very good lawyer.
Oh, I call him a legal genius. He's defending himself a lot.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that he in a couple places he's interrogating witnesses.
Yep.
And
I also, and there's this kind of one of those sub arguments there that's in there. I call him one of the first populists, and I really truly think he is. And what I didn't get into, and again, this is there's a tie to Andrew Jackson later on, and there's one line at the end of the chapter that talks about that. But because of that populism, and Andrew Jackson is loosely connected to the conspiracy, but not enough for me to bring him into this.
Right.
Chapter.
Yeah. He's certainly connected with William Blount in Tennessee. And I don't know. I'm not trying to introduce Jackson now as a character for the book on Scoundrels, but it's someone like Burr who really sees the way the political winds are blowing. And in fact, in Gore Vidal's novel, Burr is he is actually Martin Van Buren's father through some illegitimate relationship, which is, so Vidal certainly saw that connection between Burr and populism, which, Burr, different sense of politics, I suppose, than Jefferson had. What about, Wilkinson is such an interesting character, and you wonder how someone who was so flagrantly corrupt could have not only survived so long, but been held in positions of power for so long. Yeah,
that's a great question. If everybody has so many suspicions about this guy, why do they keep giving him a job? I think that's really the question that the author of that chapter, Sam Watson, picked up on. That's the question he explores, right? So why did this guy get away from it so long? Is it simply that he was, such a skilled liar? Is or something that he can just fake it for how many years?
Yeah,
and he's around, right? Sam, I thought this was really insightful. He's around very skilled politicians, right? Washington, Jefferson, Madison. These are not naive guys, right?
Yeah.
And yet they keep going back to him. So part of it seems to be that in addition to all the scheming and trying to enrich himself personally and the spying for Spain and all that kind of thing, he was also an effective general. He was actually good. He was good at his day job, which helps, right? Which throws a lot of pressure off of you. And I think when it came down to it, he did not go all the way with Burr, right? Now you can ask, is that because of some late patriotism, or is it self-interest that he was going to throw Burr overboard rather than stick with him? Okay, so whatever it was, Wilkinson came to a turning point and didn't turn, right? He didn't ultimately go against the United States. And, I wonder about how valuable the information he was giving the Spanish really was, right? Was this really stuff they couldn't have gotten anywhere else? Or is this stuff that they, that he was just telling them things that they already knew, or that if they had just been more creative, they could have found out themselves. Yeah.
Remind us again, David, what his position was when he was giving information to the Spanish or selling information to the Spanish. What was his job?
He's a general. And he's stationed for a period in New Orleans.
Okay.
And he had moved to, is he from Maryland originally, I think?
Yeah.
He had moved to Kentucky. He's one of the founders, or one of the early leading citizens of Frankfurt. So he's along there on Mississippi, and he was stationed at the army position there in New Orleans for a while. So a crucial military and diplomatic position.
So he's the highest ranking general at the time. He was the second ranking general behind Anthony Wayne, and then in 1796, Wayne dies in Erie, Pennsylvania. And he is then promoted. Now, Wayne and Wilkinson had a huge rift, which is alluded to in the chapter. And so Wilkinson is definitely out for himself. He's an opportunist, and I think that's what Sam really points out. Maybe he's even a true American, right? But what's interesting is the folks that were had the claims against him, proof that he was a spy during his lifetime, was a guy named Daniel Clark. And this is not in the book per se, but Daniel Clark was an American that lived in New Orleans and joined the Spanish for a time. New Orleans was controlled by the Spanish, and then came back to the Americas, or came back to the United States. And so he was very in tune, with who was showing up and who was doing stuff in New Orleans with the Spanish.
Interesting.
So that lent credibility to the claims against him.
You certainly, and Spain is certainly interested in. They are paying off a number of these folks in the Western country. And then
you get Don Diego Gardox, the Spanish minister of the United States, who during the Revolution is truly, helpful the United States.
Sure. He's a Spanish minister to the United States.
Exactly. But as soon as the war is over, Spain and the United States become rivals, geopolitical rivals. And that's one of the things we forget. Is the United States and Spain has a border for 40 years? And that's the part, and Spain is meddling on the American frontier, especially in the 1780s. They're trying to get with James Wilkinson, who had resigned his position in the army and was a private citizen at the time, trying to separate Kentucky from the United States. Then you have George Morgan, who was a witness against Burr in the trial. That's what I write about. But before that, why Burr shows up at his house trying to recruit him and his family. Morgan had been trying to. He worked with the Spanish for about 40 days, set up the colony of New Madrid in present-day Missouri. So it's at the end of the Articles of Confederation, that period where people don't know what's going on and they're trying to fix their bets. And they see the Spanish as hey, this might be a better opportunity for us. Stable economy, free trade on the Mississippi, and then it kind of all falls apart. And
you have to imagine the likelihood that the United States would be able to control this vast territory all the way up to the Mississippi River. That's a big speculation, and these guys are betting, and some of them betting on both sides.
Definitely.
We're talking with David Head and Tim Hemmis, who have edited a great book, A Republic of Scoundrels, the schemers, intriguers, and adventurers who created a new American nation. I'm just wondering if you have ideas. I know hate to ask someone who's just finished a book. If you have ideas now for a second volume, if there are people you left out that you really think should be in this cast of characters.
Well, one of the parts of getting the book together is that I had to restrain Tim from kidding 3 dozen guys.
We're
not going to be able to have a 500,000 word book here. No publisher is going to go for that. But yes, Tim definitely has a number of guys that we could do a sequel to. You want to mention something, Tim?
Oh, well, there's Dr. John Conley on the frontier, who's a loyalist who's disrupting. He's probably most known for his involvement in the Dunmore War.
You
the folks with the Holland Land Company. I know you talked about Robert Morris earlier.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that whole scandal
Mm-hmm.
with the Holland Land Company in Western New York. Kind of a little bit of part of my roots there.
Okay.
Growing up in Chautauqua.
Sure.
So there's a bunch of different ones, minor players.
There's the state of Franklin guys.
Oh yeah,
out there. That would be good. Citizen Genet was somebody that we really wanted to do, but didn't quite work out.
James Reynolds, it seems.
James Reynolds, yes. So once you start looking, you see these kind of characters all over the place, and then it becomes the question is: are there enough sources? Is there somebody who's got expertise? That's one of the things. So one of the things that led us to do this as an edited volume was just the variety of characters there are. It was just too much to expect any one person or any two people to become expert in all these different things, especially when some of these guys are doing things secretively, and you really have to dig and unearth it. So the approach of asking individual experts, to draw from their research, I think was really effective. So, so yes, if you have a scoundrel that you've always wanted to write about,
Now, has this made you think? Has this made you think differently about the founding and about the birth of the Republic? Looking at these particular characters,
I think one of the things, and this is an idea that I've had for a while, but is really that the founding is not just the founders, but it's a founding generation,
right?
And that it's all cast of characters, and I think it's a more complete picture of the Revolution and the early Republic. So.
Yeah, it's also it's even more remarkable, that this is all stuck together, right? It's even more remarkable that the whole thing worked.
Yeah,
you have so many people actively undermining the effort to stay together as a country. When you have, European powers like the British and the Spanish, who, their determined policy is for the United States to be broken up. Small countries, they'll be easier to deal with. How many people are saying, forget this public virtue stuff. I'm going to go get what's mine. Just so many pieces. It's just so much, just kind of pulling it apart. How it all stuck together in the end is just so remarkable when you think about the larger cast of characters. Yeah,
really is. And it's also reassuring knowing that they weren't creating the new nation, the Constitution, for the virtuous, but that they understood human nature in a really profound way. I'm now talking about the Washingtons, Madisons, as opposed to the Wilkinson certainly understood human nature, and that's how he benefited.
Right, that's a good point. You don't want to have a system that works only if there are good, competent people in charge, right?
Right.
The ideal would be a system in which you could have incompetent, even corrupt people in charge, and it still works.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's much harder to do. But that's a good point about, if you only, it's the Madison's old line about men being angels, right?
Yes, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Right. He also said that good and wise statesmen will not always be at the helm, which
exactly.
Right? Yes.
Not always. It is kind of optimistic there.
Yes, that's true.
Occasionally,
maybe. Yes. Yes. Well, thank you both. We've been talking with David Head and Tim Hemmis, who are the editors of A Republic of Scoundrels, the schemers, intriguers, and adventurers who created a new American nation. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for writing the book, putting this together. And I'm glad that Tim had the idea and that the pandemic made it possible. And you two guys have actually never met in person, you were saying.
Yes, that's one of the strange but also wonderful things about the way that we work now. So you can do all of this electronically, virtually, and on the phone and everything.
Yep.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank Jonathan Lane, our producer, and our listeners around the country. We have people tuning in regularly in all parts of the world. So every week I thank some of them. And if you are in one of these places, send Jonathan Lane an email, jlane@revolution250.org, and he'll send you some of our Revolution 250 swag. So this week, those who are in Boston, Lexington, and Taunton here in Massachusetts, as well as Houston, Delhi, Frankfurt, Germany, Franklin, Tennessee, and Davenport, Florida, Los Angeles, Long Beach, all places between and beyond. Thanks for joining us. And now we will be piped out on the road to Boston. Thank you so much.